Hi, I'm Matt Eland with Tech Elevator. I want to talk to you today about one of my favorite features of C# and .NET development in general, and that's something called Language Integrated Query, or LINQ for short, LINQ. LINQ is a set of functions that let us work with collections of objects. So if we have a list or an array or some other type of a collection like a hash set or something like that, we can use LINQ to do operations on it. So if we had a collection of things, we only wanted to see certain items, we can use some parts of LINQ. If we want to transform everything in that array by a certain function, we could do that as well. If we want to get the minimum or maximum thing inside of that, or do some custom ordering. These are all things that LINQ can help us with. And we'll see what I'm talking about when just kind of as we get started here. So this application I have right now is a sort of simple application that builds a list of movies. And then it will just loop over each movie and it will display the title. So let's give it a run and see what it's doing currently. And see if you can recognize what these movies might correspond to in the real world. They're not too closely disguised. But the point is, we have some collection of objects in memory, and then we can work with it. To illustrate it a little bit more, I'm going to run my debugger and put a breakpoint on line 15, and now we'll take a look at what movies is. We see it's 13 objects, and each object has a number of different properties. We'll look more at these in a second. And we're just looping over each one, and we're looking at the title property. And we're just writing the title to the console. So let's take a look at what we have inside of our movie class before we really start looking at what LINQ can offer. So here we have an ID, we have some string properties, the title, an alternate title, and then some Boolean things we can use for filtering, as well as some numeric things and a constructor. We're not really going to have to worry about this class too much, other than we're going to be using some of these properties here to filter and order and sort things like that. If you're curious about the actual data that I'm using for this example, it's just a list of movies that we create and then return from the static method and the static class. And you might be able to get a laugh or two if you're familiar with the source movies. But let's go back to program and we'll take a look at LINQ. So first of all, if we want to use LINQ, we have to add a using statement for it. So using statements, just as a refresher, these let us import functionality defined in other namespaces, including functionality defined inside of .NET Framework or .NET Core. So we can say using system.linq, and that gives us what we need for LINQ. And now the first thing I want to try to do is I want to filter down movies using LINQ's where. So first thing we do is we list all the movies. Well, that's fine. Let's keep doing that. But I want to do a for each good movie in movies console.writeLine good movie title. But instead of just doing this, I'm going to add .where. And so we see we have this little suggested method here. So this filters a sequence of values based on a predicate. A predicate is one of those words I don't want you to worry about too much. It just means a function. We're going to be using an anonymous function or an arrow function, as you're probably used to calling them in JavaScript, to filter things. And here, if we hover over it, it says it takes a function that takes in a movie and returns a Boolean. So it needs something that gives us a movie, and we give it a Boolean value. So I'm going to say where, and then I'll type in, so we have this kind of a fat arrow here. So this thing on the left is the first parameter to our little function, and then anything on the right is whatever we want it to do. so we have a function over here that we can write. So I can say I want to see the movies where character dies, for example. So this right here says I have a function that takes in a movie and it returns a Boolean. So this thing on the right has to be some form of a Boolean. It could be the character dies. It could be the number of space battles has to be greater than 1. It could be, anything else. It could be the cast has to be the original cast. Whatever you want it to do. And we'll go back to that in a second, but I want to see if this is working. So we'll run it, and we should see the list of all our movies, and then we should see only the movies that have at least one space battle. So here we have all of our movies, and then now over here we have things that have greater than one space battle. So we have Stellar Voyage 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, and then some of our nice little reboots. Okay, so it looks like it might be working. For clarity's sake, I'm just going to disable this list of all movies right here. So here, this right here is some function that returns a Boolean. It takes in a movie and it returns a Boolean. So I could say a movie that is a good movie. So here we just have a movie, and this has to be something that's true or false. I'm choosing to be a little bit explicit here by saying equals equals true. Normally I might just say the Boolean value. We'll see that in a second. But here, these are the ones that I personally consider good. Stellar Voyage 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 2009. So every time this runs, it's looping over all of our movies in movies, and it's running this function right here on each one of them. It's saying, hey, Stellar Voyage 1, is this movie defined as good? Oh, well, no. Well, we'll keep going. Stellar Voyage 2, is that defined as good? Oh, you know it. All right, well, that's getting included in this collection you'll actually loop over. And so it's using this to effectively filter everything that we have. In fact, this is the equivalent of the JavaScript filter, and we'll take a look at that at the end here today. Just another example. I want to see movies that occur on Earth. So here we take in a movie, and the thing on the right has to be some form of a Boolean value, true or false. This happens to be a Boolean property, so it's fine. We run it, and we should see the movies that primarily take place on Earth, which is Stellar Voyage 4 and then Stellar Voyage 8. And that looks correct to me. So that is where. It's the exact equivalent of the JavaScript function of filter, which we see right up here. So this is how we might do it in JavaScript. We just do myArray.filter based on something. This is the same thing in JavaScript, where JavaScript has a value that's either truthy or falsy. But we don't have to deal with truthy and falsy in C# because everything is, we have a type. It's going to be true or false or whatever. Okay, so let's do this again. Let's take a look at select. So here we're going to show all our movies, but we only want the titles. We only want to see, or maybe we just want to see the space battles that they have. So we're going to display the, if we wanted to print out there's the number of space battles that they have. This is how we would do it normally. Okay, we do a for each over them, and then we do a console write line, and then give me something inside of that, right? So here, if I run this, I should see a whole bunch of numbers representing the number of space battles in each movie. And we can see one of the best ones actually has 0 space battles, which is kind of cool. sorry, nerdy aside. What if we didn't want to have to do this all the time? Instead of doing this down here, maybe we just wanted a collection of integers. We have a list of movies, but we really want a list of integers. So we can use movies.select to transform our movie into whatever we want it to be. And we see it's a function that takes in a movie and it outputs a t result. Well, what's t result? It's whatever you want it to be. So it could be movie.title. It could be movie.has time travel. It could be, in our case, number of space battles. And now it's complaining. It says, hey, I can't convert from type integer. This is returning a collection of integers. I can't convert from integer to movie. It's like, oh, okay, well, I have this wrong over here. So int num battles in movies.select. So here we're selecting our movies. So for each movie, so movie 1, it's going to come in here. Okay, here's your movie object. All right, go in here, num space battles. Oh, well, that's an integer. So it's going to transform the entire collection into a collection of integers. And then down here, we can just write num space battles. We'll take a look at this with the debugger in a second. It'll be a little bit more clear what it's doing. But for now, let's just test it out. And we should see a whole bunch of numbers like we saw before. And we do. But let's introduce a new variable here. This is going to be an enumerable of integer battles in each movie equals movies.select. And so now I can go down here, I'll run it, put in a breakpoint, and we see movies in each battles in each movie. If we expand result view, we see that it's taken our collection of movies and has transformed each one into a collection of integers. But why did it transform it into a collection of integers? Because we have the select here. So here I have a select, I have a movie, and what do I want to do to the movie? Well, I want to grab its number of space battles. If I wanted to grab its cast, I could do that. Except now it's telling me that this isn't a number of battles anymore. This is maybe casts. So maybe this is cast in each movie. And now it's telling me it doesn't like this, that because it can't convert a string to an integer. But here, this is another way of using a select, and I'm now taking my select, I'm transforming each movie, so we're giving a collection of movies, and we come out with a collection of strings, and the string happens to represent the cast of each movie. We run it, and we get original series, next gen, reboot. So it takes each one and it maps it to something else. And in fact, that's what we call this in JavaScript land. If we remember our JavaScript, we use we use some array dot map to map from one thing to another thing. So this is about the exact same thing as what we did in JavaScript, only the naming is a little bit different. Instead of map, we do select. So you can kind of start to see how we have the same things in JavaScript and C#. So if we wanted to do our array functions or the equivalent of them on the server, we easily could do that in C#. And in fact, I tend to like the IntelliSense you get better, the compile time support in C# much better than what you get in JavaScript, which is not a lot because it's JavaScript. The naming, I think, makes a lot more sense to me as well. Where and select, it's really kind of oriented towards somebody who thinks about things like a database versus filter and map. Okay, let's take a look at another one. So let's say we want to get the first movie that has space whales in it. Okay, so first movie with whales. Let's do this without LINQ at first. So if I was going to do this normally, I would do for each movie in movies. That's hard to say. For each movie in movies, if movie dot num space whales is less than or equal to 0, keep going. That's not what I want. Otherwise, first movie with whales equals movie, and I'm going to stop evaluating anything else in the future. And then down here I could say if first movie with whales is not equal to null, first movie with whales dot title has whales in it. So here we're declaring a variable, first movie with whales. We're looping over a collection of movies. We're saying, hey, if we have space whales, I'm just going to flip this condition just for clarity here. There we go. That's a little simpler to read. So for each movie in movies, if we have whales, then the first movie with whales is this movie, and stop evaluating anything else in that collection. Finally, when we end, we should have either something that has a movie that has whales in it, or nothing. So let's run this, and I think we'll see one that does. And it looks like I might have made a whoopsies here. It looks like we actually don't have anything that has whales in it. Yep, I'm not setting it. So let's just fix my data real quick. Num space whales equals 2. Names George and Gracie. So that was a whoopsies. So now that my data's right, if I actually run this again, you see Stellar Voyage 4, yada yada yada, has whales in it. Okay, so how did this work? This looped over our collection, it found the first one that has whales in it, and then it set its variable to that. This is, I don't know, about 7 lines of code here to find something. It's not awful, but there's a better way of doing it with LINQ. So I'm going to instead do that. So I'm going to say first movie with whales equals movies FirstOrDefault. We'll talk about what that means in a second. And it looks here we have a couple different options for method signatures. We can either not give it anything, in which case it's going to give us the first thing in the list, or we can give it another predicate, which is another word I don't like. But it says here it needs a function that takes a movie and turns it into a bool. Okay, so I'm going to take a movie, and I'm going to say movie num space whales is greater than 0. This right here is the exact same condition we have right here. And in fact, LINQ is doing the same thing with it under the hood. So here I got FirstOrDefault. It's saying, hey, find the first movie with space whales in it. If you don't have, if it's If it's present, then tell me which one has the whales in it. Otherwise, you know, whatever. So just for clarity, we'll run it and we'll see if we get the same result. And we see that we do. Okay, so let's talk about this FirstOrDefault thing here. So FirstOrDefault means give me the first thing that matches. If nothing matches, I want you to give me the default value. Well, the default value of what? Well, whatever this is. So what's the default value of a movie? Well, the default value of any reference type is going to be null. The default value for any number is going to be 0. The default value for booleans is going to be false. That kind of a thing. So this is saying, hey, look over this collection, give me the first thing that matches. If nothing matches, just give me, in this case, it'd be null because it's a movie. So let's illustrate that by saying I need something with 5 whales. And just for clarity in our demo here, so this is going to find the first thing that has 5 space whales in it. There is no match to this because we have one thing that has 2 and that's it. And we see we have no match found. We also have a method called first. First is very similar to FirstOrDefault, with the exception that if it doesn't find a match to this, it'll throw an exception. So if I run this, I get an invalid operation exception. Sequence contains no matching element. It's telling me there is no movie that has that matches this condition here. However, if I change my condition to be just any space whales and I rerun it, the application will run just fine. We'll get our message and everything. I tend to use FirstOrDefault because I want to be able to respond more gracefully to something not being present than throwing an exception. In general, I try to avoid exceptions being thrown if ever possible. So if I can check for null, I'm going to do that versus, you know, letting an error happen, because exceptions are slow and they're unpredictable sometimes. They're hard to think about when you're designing your applications. Okay, so this is FirstOrDefault. This is the equivalent to the JavaScript array function of find. So we have the same thing in JavaScript. So we might say instead num space whales is greater than 0. Exact same sort of a syntax, just find. This is one case where JavaScript's naming might be a little bit better. If we know we're working with lists in C#, we do have a method named find, but in general I try to use FirstOrDefault because this works for any type of collection, not just lists. All right, so those that's filter, or sorry, where, that's select, and that is FirstOrDefault. So we can also order movies if we wanted to. So let's say I want to just show us all the movies based on the number of space battles they have. Okay? So for each and I'll use OrderBy. And this says it takes in, it's got a predicate again here. It takes in a movie and it returns a T key. Well, what's T key? Well, I'm not terribly sure in the context of LINQ, but I can tell you it's something that is very easy to order by, such as an integer or a string. So in this case, we're going to take in a movie and we're going to output something that we want to order it by. We wanted to order by the, I believe I said a minute ago, the number of space battles. Okay. and I'm going to put in a parentheses just for clarity. So we can now see the number of space battles each movie has at the end of it. Okay, so let's run that. And we see here we're ordering from 0 all the way up to 3. Well, I kind of wanted to see the ones that had the most. Well, there's another method for that. Here's OrderByDescending. So that's going to order us greatest to least. And so now when I run this, I get this result. So 3, 2, 1, 0. I could order them in alphabetical order if I wanted to. If I could just say title. This is actually going to order them from Z to A. So reverse alphabetical, because I'm still doing order by descending. And there we are. We're doing our sort of a reverse alphabetical order. Let's get it actually in alphabetical order. And there we have it. So this is the equivalent of the JavaScript array method of sort. This is a lot more convenient than that method, and we actually don't teach sort very much, well, at all in our curriculum, just because it is a little bit more complex to use. But order by is something that you'll often find yourself doing. All right. Let's wrap up by talking about a couple other ones. So let's say we wanted to find the minimum and maximum number of things in a movie. So let's say we want to find the max battles and the minimum battles in a movie. Well, what we can do here is we can say, hey, movies.max number of space battles. And similarly, I'm going to be evil and copy and paste this. Movies.min space battles. I can say console.writeLine So here it's going to look over the entire collection, and it's going to grab some sort of a value out of here, and it's going to give me the maximum that it sees. Here it's going to give me the minimum that it sees. I'll run this, and we should see a range of 0 to 3. And it does. That's exactly what I expected to see. In JavaScript, you'd have to write a reducer for this, which, as we remember, has some very funky syntax. In C#, really easy. We also have things like count, average, sum, difference, things like that. So LINQ is very, very powerful for these mathematical operations. And finally, if we wanted to see if we have anything that meets a certain variety, a certain query, we can. When we say, is the enterprise ever destroyed? Movies.any, and it says it has a predicate here that takes in a movie, and it returns a Boolean. Ship is destroyed. And we should see a very solid true to that at the very end. So we'll just take a look at this. And we do. So any is going to return true if it has any match. It's sort of like a where it stops at the first one that defines it's true. This is often helpful for just finding if you have anything that meets a certain criteria. We do have the equivalent of that in JavaScript via something called sum, S-O-M-E. We don't really teach it because it's not as frequent that you need to use it, but there are some cases where you need to use any. So LINQ is a very, very, very helpful library just for back-end development. It's very good for working with arrays and lists and anything that implements IEnumerable, which is sort of this internal .NET type, which means something that can be looped over via for each or whatever. In our case, we're working with a list, but it doesn't matter. Anything that's an IEnumerable, you can do a where or a select or a FirstOrDefault or an OrderBy or a min or a max or an any. This is really one of my favorite parts of .NET. This syntax here inside of these functions, that's hard to get used to. But once you do, it's really, really worth it. It can really save you a lot of repetitive loops. So instead of writing something like this all over your code, you just write a single line of code here, and you can kind of chain these things together. So I can say FirstOrDefault and then .select to select its title, and you can kind of get these nice little pipelines going. So LINQ is really everywhere in the .NET world, and it's really powerful. It is scary, but it's worth it. It's very much worth it, in my opinion, to learn it. I think it makes a lot more sense than the naming and syntax of some of the JavaScript array methods, particularly once you get into these min and max instead of reduce. I really have never needed to do anything like a reduce in the .NET world because these functions just help me out significantly. So I hope you got some value out of this. If you have any questions, please email me at matt.eland@techelevator.com. That's ELAND, so matt.eland@techelevator.com. And I hope you enjoy it. So happy coding.